Our next speaker is Sister Jannat Bramley. Jannat Bramley is a Canadian Muslim convert and a health and psychology researcher. She accepted Islam on July 18, 2015, on Eid al-Fitr, in front of the St. Catherine's community with Dr. Mustafa Khattab. Since converting to Islam, Jannat has developed a keen interest in bridging her passion for health and psychology with Islam. Her vision is to share her knowledge with the Muslim community to promote healthy spiritual growth. Her first community initiative is a sisters group called the Sisters Sunday Coffee Chats.
With her lecture titled, Awakened, My First Year as a Muslim, please help us in extending a warm welcome to Sister Jannat Bramley.
Assalamu alaikum. I'd first like to say thank you to all of you, not only for the honor of speaking here tonight, but also for the opportunity to share my personal journey with you. So I grew up in a small town in south central Ontario that was not even predominantly Caucasian. It was actually all Caucasian, all Christian. So I had my fair share of exposure to Christianity and attended church and so on and so forth growing up. I can remember and recall as a little kid sitting in church thinking to myself that I just really didn't believe what I was hearing. So a lack of belief was something that actually started very, very early for me. Growing up, I went through a lot of really tough experiences, and I faced a lot of abuse and neglect, and poverty was a huge issue. And I think that, when a child goes through experiences like that, and this is their reality day in and day out, something as wonderful as the existence of God is just not something that you can easily conceive of. I recall incidences of being left home alone at the age of 4 and literally actually being home for 12 hours in a day to myself. I remember actually one evening, my dad actually tried to kidnap my brother and I and leave the country with us to a country where Canada did not have jurisdiction to come and get us. So that's the kind of stuff that I faced. As I'm sure you can imagine, by the time I reached early adulthood, as much as I wanted to leave those experiences behind, there was a lot of emotional scars, and I coped with that in a very unhealthy way. I was out drinking and partying. I always had to have a boyfriend because I always needed someone to make me feel loved, to give me love that I felt like I never got from my family. After I had a boyfriend pass away, while I was with him one evening, I started revisiting the question of God's existence. I went back to Christianity looking for answers. I, learned about Buddhism. I looked at New Age spirituality. And as much as I wanted to believe it, I just really didn't. I wanted answers for my life. I wanted answers about, is there an afterlife? I wanted to know that the person I had just lost in my arms, was there somewhere they were going to be? But as much as I wanted so badly to believe it, I just didn't believe what I read. So many years later, in the summer of 2014, I actually started having some rather strange feelings. I started to have this feeling that I wanted to go to church, but I didn't want to be inside of a church. What does one do with a feeling like that? I, in my head, imagine myself walking up to the church and not going inside, so I'm actually just going to stand outside of a church. I'm going to look crazy. I pushed these feelings off. I fought them as much as possible. Over a 10-month period, they continued to grow, starting to come back more frequently. So I considered having a psychology and a health background. Probably there's something missing from my life. Something emotionally or psychologically must be off. I looked into and researched everything I could, but I could not figure out what it was that was going on with me. So again, I pushed it off until it got to a point where I went through a 2.5-month period of really, really bad insomnia. So at that point, my health was deteriorating a bit from a lack of sleep, and I knew I had 2 options. Either I was going to go see a doctor, or I was going to go see a religious leader of some sort. I opted to see a religious leader because I couldn't imagine showing up to a doctor and saying, I haven't slept in 2.5 months because I feel like I want to go stand outside of a church. So I got in touch with the local masjid and was put in touch with Imam Mustafa. And I want to share with you a little bit of what it was like walking to the mosque that day. I was terrified. I had no idea what was going on with me. I was a scientist, I'm a well-educated person, but this whole other realm of feelings were completely new to me. So it was a 3-kilometer walk in the middle of July, and as I walked there, I kept feeling so sick to my stomach that I just had to keep stopping. I got about halfway there, and I started to chicken out and feel like I didn't think I could walk the rest of the way. I just felt so physically sick. I knew I needed an answer, though, because I hadn't slept. So I used the last little bit of money I had in my bank account, and I took a cab the rest of the way. That was the first time that I met Imam Mustafa, and it was actually Ramadan, not that I knew what Ramadan was at that point. And he talked to me about the 5 pillars of Islam, and we were, sitting in the men's prayer room. And I was trying to listen to what he was saying, but I was still so overwhelmed by my own feelings that it was really, really hard to pay attention to him. So I was just trying to nod, After that, I went and sat in the women's prayer room by myself, and I was looking around at the patterns on the carpet, the writings on the wall, wondering to myself, what am I doing sitting in a mosque? And there was something in that moment that just really clicked. And I realized that the feeling that I'd had for the last year was God. And that was the moment that, for the first time in my life, for the very first time in my life, I met God. And I can't tell you what that is like, especially when you're someone who's been through some very tough experiences in life. To know that something that wonderful does exist. To know that you're not alone. It's the most humbling and beautiful moment of my life. What I learned from this experience was that God really does have the ability to touch people's hearts, even the most lost of the lost. My advice to all of you is that if you're ever at a place in your faith where you're not feeling it strong in your heart, open your heart, follow it. You'll find him. He's there. You just have to open your heart to it. I went through some experiences after I converted that taught me some really important lessons. As I'm sure you can imagine, my family was not very pleased about the whole thing. My brother thought that all religions are cults and that I just must want a sense of community. My sister-in-law assumed that because I was single at the age of 32, I must be wanting an arranged marriage. And then there was my mom's infamous reaction, which was she thought that I had joined ISIS, and she begged me not to leave the country. That one always gets a laugh from everyone. So that's been a little bit of a struggle, I'm not going to lie to you. And I know for many Muslims, they say, oh, inshallah, like it'll work out, your family will come around. The only thing I'm going to ask of you is try to imagine that, your child, your parent, or whoever in your life comes to you and says, I'm Christian and I'm happier. It's a hard one to choke down. So, I ask that people be very supportive of reverts when they come, because what they go through with their families is tough. It's been 16 months now. My family has not wrapped their mind around it. Inshallah, they do come around to it. But to put yourself in the other person's shoes, imagine someone in your life says, I want to be Christian. How's that going to be? So I started getting very involved in the community and thought that this might be a great way for me to build support. But as many new reverts, it's a lot to take in. For someone who just met God, it's a lot to take in. You go into the masjid and everyone is correcting you about everything. You're a month in, you don't even know how to pray, and someone's saying, oh, have you put hijab on? Are you ready for marriage? It's a lot, guys, I'm not gonna lie. And the pressure just became too much. And I got really confused because I had my family and my friends pulling me away from Islam in their heads, thinking that this is the right thing. Like they're thinking I've gone down a very bad path. And then you get the other side where it's the Muslim community, and they're like, no, come this way. And you're just being tugged in so many different directions. I ended up taking a step back from a lot of people in my life. I ended up losing a lot of my friends because most of them were drinking friends. Times got pretty tough with my family. And I ended up actually disappearing from the Muslim community for a while. In that time that I took to myself, that happiness that I initially felt, it was there, it was back. And what I learned from that time when it was just me and God for, those months, was that I had made a mistake. My loyalty had been in the wrong spot. My loyalty had been to what my family thinks, what my friends think, what the community thinks. And it dawned on me that if God has the power to bring essentially a lifelong atheist to a masjid and convert them to Islam 3 days later, he can guide me the rest of the way. Once I got that down pat, I started to look more into how I was going to change my lifestyle. And as I told you, my 20s, it wasn't healthy. And I started looking at all the list of halal and haram things that you hear, and these are two words that, anything you do, this is the evaluation of your behavior as a Muslim. As a health and psychology researcher, I started to notice a pattern in the lists. And I started to notice that with the haram things, I'm like, oh, a lot of those things are unhealthy. And I started looking at the halal list, and I'm like, actually, a lot of those things are healthy. Even giving charity, it actually boosts the chemicals in your brain associated with feelings of happiness. So I started doing a little bit of research, and I started looking at neurology papers and started examining, because I'd ask people, I'm like, why do we pray 5 times a day? Why no alcohol? Everyone told me the same thing, because Allah tells us to or because Allah tells us not to. It really wasn't enough for me. I was 32 years old. I had grown up knowing the same thing my whole life. How was I going to completely change all of this? So when I was reading this research, I started to discover things like, for people who pray 20 minutes or more a day, it causes systematic changes in the brain that makes the brain actually function healthier. I discovered that while toxic thoughts can cause brain damage, praying can actually reverse that brain damage and cause the body and the brain to thrive. I found that praying boosts your immune system, lowers your stress levels, decreases the chance of developing a heart condition, and increases life expectancy. Interestingly, praying in groups actually improves your social health because it helps people have feelings of unity and trust with the people that they pray with. I also found that when you pray when you're stressed out, it actually switches the part of your brain that is functioning when you're stressed out and switches over to the part of your brain that's rational and where there is peace of mind. This is prayer. So when I started thinking to myself, why do I pray 5 times a day? I realized that there's a whole lot of answers that I just don't know about. But I'm being told to pray 5 times a day because there's all these things that are so good for me, and that's what Allah wants for me. I pushed deeper from there because wearing modest clothing and wearing a hijab was something that was really hard for me to come to terms with. So I had the faith, I want to follow the religion. but I didn't know how to be that different. And it's something that when you completely change how you've dressed after 32 years and you wear something, on your head and you're not doing your hair, it really challenges you at your core. It challenges your identity. Being a hijabi for the first while of my path was not something that I wanted. I respected wearing it. I respected those who did wear it, but it was just too far off from what I was used to. But as I started doing some soul searching, I realized something very important about what Islam and about what God was asking me to do. And I realized that, when I used to wear tight clothes and go to the bar, was I valuing myself? Did I feel good? No. I was letting someone else define my body. And I realized with so many different things in Islam, it's God teaching you to value yourself and to value others. That was a very profound lesson for me, especially growing up the way that I did, because feeling loved or learning how to love yourself is not something that you get in an abusive home. And it has essentially helped me to transform the inside of myself. I now understand that whatever it is that is being asked of me, that it is teaching me to love myself. I've come to learn that Islam is a religion that teaches us how to live healthy lives. It teaches us love, to love yourself, to love others. And Islam is a religion that empowers you to define your own value rather than letting someone else define it. And when Islam is what teaches you how to be healthy, how to love yourself, to love others, and empowers you to define your own worth, being proud to be Muslim isn't something that you have to teach. It just comes naturally. Although I'm not necessarily an inspirational Muslim, what I do feel is inspirational is the power that Allah has to guide even the most lost. His power to guide my journey in a way that teaches me about Islam while also guiding me closer to Him. The power that He has to transform a human being and their life the way that He has mine in 16 months. It's the moments like this where you know that Islam is more than a religion and that the Quran is more than a book. It's these profound spiritual awakenings that ignite this passion in my soul to keep chasing after the one who created me. Thank you.